My name is Penelope Hart. I'm 36 years old, and for most of my life, I have been the kind of woman people describe as steady. Steady at work, steady in relationships, steady in crisis. I live in Portland, Oregon, where I work as an estate planning consultant. My job is to help families organize what they value: homes, savings, businesses, heirlooms, and decide what happens to those things when life inevitably shifts. I sit across polished wooden tables and listen to people argue gently about who deserves what, who can be trusted, who can't. I translate emotion into structure, sentiment into paperwork. Most people assume that because I speak softly, I am passive. Because I don't interrupt, I don't challenge. Because I don't react quickly, I don't notice. That assumption has followed me since childhood. In my family, I was the eldest daughter, the responsible one, the calm one, the one who didn't need as much. My youngest sister, Lily, was the opposite: brilliant, impulsive, adored. My mother often said Lily had fire, and I had foundation. It sounded like a compliment at the time. Foundations, after all, are important, but foundations are also buried. This story isn't about screaming matches or dramatic betrayals. It isn't about revenge either. I don't believe in explosive justice. I believe in quiet consequences, the kind that unfold slowly, deliberately, without spectacle. What happened began with something small: a keepsake, a family heirloom that had belonged to my grandmother, her last piece of jewelry, a delicate gold locket she wore every Sunday to church. Inside it was a photograph so faded you could barely make out her younger face. She once told me, when I was 12, "This will stay with the woman who understands its weight." I thought she meant emotional weight. I was wrong. The moment I discovered that my mother had secretly sold that locket to cover my youngest sister's gambling debt, something inside me didn't break. It rearranged. This story is about that rearrangement, about what it means to be underestimated for decades, about the subtle ways families assign roles, and how dangerous it can be when the reliable one finally stops absorbing the cost of everyone else's chaos. There was no shouting, no public exposure, no dramatic scene where I held up a receipt and demanded apologies. What there was documentation, observation, patience, and a decision. Over the next hour, I'm going to tell you exactly how I found out. Why did no one think I would do anything about it? And what happened when I quietly chose not to protect them from the consequences of their own choices anymore? I won't exaggerate. I won't villainize. I'll tell it as it unfolded, because sometimes the most powerful shifts don't happen in raised voices. They happen in silence. Have you ever been the one everyone assumes will simply endure? Before the locket disappeared, before I ever looked at a bank statement with suspicion, I already knew who I was in my family. I was the stable one. That was the word my mother used most often. Stable, dependable. "Penelope will handle it," she'd say, as if it were a law of physics. If Lily missed rent, I would help her structure a payment plan. If my mother forgot to renew an insurance policy, I would call and sort it out. If holidays needed organizing, I made the spreadsheet. I wasn't asked, I was assumed. The strange part is, I didn't resent it at first. There's a quiet pride in being trusted with responsibility. As a child, I equated usefulness with love. When my grandmother passed away 5 years ago, it was I who stayed overnight at the hospital. Me who sorted her paperwork. Me who sat beside my mother while she cried and said, "I don't know how to do this." I did, because I always did. Lily, meanwhile, was forgiven before she erred. She was the youngest by 8 years, charismatic, beautiful in a reckless, unfinished way. She moved through life like someone expecting cushions beneath every fall. When she changed majors 3 times in college, my mother called it exploration. When she quit jobs abruptly, it was because she just hasn't found her passion yet. When she borrowed money, it was temporary. Always temporary. I never borrowed money, not because I never needed it, but because I learned early that the stable one doesn't need things. Need was reserved for Lily. At family dinners, conversations bent toward her, her stories, her new ideas, her dramatic breakups. I would sit, listening, occasionally offering practical advice that went mostly unacknowledged. If I tried to redirect the conversation, mentioning a promotion, a certification, a case I was proud of, the energy shifted politely, then drifted back to her. It wasn't malicious. That's what makes it harder to explain. No one insulted me. No one told me I was less important. They simply operated as if my life would continue successfully without tending, as if I was self-watering. Even my grandmother, who loved us both deeply, once squeezed my hand and said, "You'll be fine, Penny. You always are." Then she looked at Lily and whispered, "But she worries me." I understood the hierarchy in that sentence. I was fine. Lily required saving. The irony is, I built a career around preventing exactly this dynamic. I've watched families fracture over inheritance not because of money itself, but because of accumulated assumptions. The dependable child was expected to step aside. The volatile one excused again. I used to think my family was different. After Grandma passed, the will was simple. Most assets went to my mother. A few sentimental items were specified. The gold locket wasn't listed formally. It was verbally promised to me years earlier. "For the one who understands its weight," she had said. My mother handed it to me at the funeral reception. No ceremony, just a quiet exchange in the kitchen. "She wanted you to have this," she said. Lily didn't object. She was too busy crying. I remember holding it in my palm, feeling both chosen and strangely invisible at the same time. The locket symbolized trust, continuity, responsibility. It never occurred to me that years later, that same symbol would expose exactly how I was still being seen, not as the daughter who deserved transparency, but as the one who would absorb the loss quietly. And at that time, I probably would have. The first cut wasn't the day I learned the locket was gone. It was much earlier, so small at the time that I almost dismissed it as imagination. About a year before I discovered everything, Lily started talking about investing. That was the word she used. She said it with the breathless enthusiasm she reserved for new beginnings, like the time she decided she was going to start a candle business, or become a yoga instructor, or move to Austin with a man she'd known for 9 weeks. "Online gaming markets are huge right now," she told us one Sunday at my mother's house. "There's money in understanding odds." I remember looking up from the salad I was preparing. "Odds?" I asked gently. "It's not like that," she said quickly, laughing. "It's strategic. I've been studying it." My mother nodded, impressed. She's always been good with numbers. That part wasn't true. Lily was good with charm. Numbers bored her unless they sparkled. I didn't argue. I simply watched. Over the next few months, subtle patterns emerged. Lily's mood swings intensified, not in a dramatic way, but in rhythms. High-energy excitement followed by irritability. Then sudden requests. "Mom, can you float me 2,000, just until next month?" "It's temporary. I miscalculated something." My mother would sigh the way mothers do when they know they shouldn't, but do anyway. I offered alternatives once. "If she's exploring high-risk investments," I said carefully over tea, "it might be helpful to cap exposure, maybe set a fixed monthly amount." My mother smiled in that soft, dismissive way. "You always think worst case, Penny. She's just trying to find her footing." Worst case. In my profession, the worst case scenario is simply preparedness. But I let it go. The real shift, the first true cut, happened on a Thursday afternoon when my mother called me asking for help accessing her online banking portal. She'd forgotten her password again. I drove over after work, sat beside her at the dining table, reset credentials, enabled two-factor authentication, routine. Then I noticed a withdrawal. It wasn't the amount that caught my attention at first. It was the memo line. "Private asset sale, 18,500. I paused. "What was this?" I asked casually, keeping my tone neutral. "Oh," my mother said too quickly. "Just something small. Something small doesn't come with a 5-figure deposit." "What was sold?" She hesitated, just a fraction too long. "An old piece of jewelry." "Nothing you'd care about." That sentence lingered. "Nothing you'd care about?" I didn't press. Not then. I nodded, finished updating her settings and left, but the words followed me home. There are 2 types of intuition. The dramatic kind that flares, and the quiet kind that settles heavily in your chest. Mine settled. I didn't accuse. I didn't call Lily. I didn't spiral. I opened my leather planner and wrote down the date, the amount, and the memo description. Documentation is a habit. It's also protection. For weeks, I told myself it was a coincidence. My mother owned several small jewelry pieces. Perhaps she'd finally decided to declutter. Perhaps it truly was insignificant. But the phrasing, "nothing you'd care about," kept replaying. Why frame it that way unless she already believed I would? The next time I visited, I looked at the hallway console where my grandmother's items were kept. The porcelain dish was there, the rosary, the framed black and white photo. The locket wasn't. I didn't say anything. That was the moment the cut deepened. Not because I had proof, but because I recognized the pattern. Something had been removed quietly, and everyone assumed I wouldn't notice. When something feels wrong in a family, the first instinct isn't confrontation, it's a rationalization. I told myself I was overreacting, that grief sometimes distorts memory. Maybe the locket was in a drawer, maybe my mother had sent it for cleaning, maybe I had placed more symbolic value on it than anyone else ever did. That's how normalization begins. Not with cruelty, with doubt. The following Sunday, we gathered again at my mother's house. Lily arrived late, glowing in that overly bright way she wore when she was compensating for something. She kissed my cheek, hugged our mother, and launched into a story about a near miss that had apparently almost tripled her money. Almost? I asked lightly. She waved it off. Timing issue, but I'm getting better at reading the patterns. Patterns! I watched my mother's face while Lily spoke. There was tension there now, subtle but visible to someone who studies micro-expressions for a living. Tight jaw, over-eager nodding. Financial stress has a look. I've seen it across conference tables countless times. What I didn't see was accountability. After dinner, while Lily was outside taking a call, I opened the hallway console drawer under the pretense of looking for batteries. The locket wasn't there. I checked the small velvet box where my grandmother used to keep it. Empty. I stood there longer than necessary, staring at the indentation in the fabric. The outline remained, faint but unmistakable, like something had been removed recently, not years ago. When I rejoined them in the kitchen, I didn't ask. Instead, I said, "Mum, have you updated your retirement contribution schedule? I can review it if you'd like." It was a deliberate pivot. If she had sold the locket for a practical reason, medical bills, debt restructuring, this would be the moment she would say so. "Oh, I'm fine," she said quickly. "Don't worry, Mum. Don't worry about me. Am I?" That phrase again. Don't worry. I had spent my entire life worrying on their behalf, strategizing, forecasting, anticipating risk before it became a disaster. But in this case, worry was framed as overreach. Later that night, Lily asked me to drive her home because her car was making a sound. Halfway there, she sighed dramatically. Mum gets stressed so easily. I try not to burden her. I kept my eyes on the road. "Are you?" She laughed. "You sound like a lawyer." "I am a consultant," I corrected gently. "Same thing," she said. "You always think in consequences." "Yes, that's exactly what I do." And in that moment, I realized something important. They weren't hiding the truth out of fear of confrontation. They were hiding it because they assumed I would understand, that I would contextualize it, justify it, absorb it. Stable daughters don't erupt, they recalibrate. That's the unspoken contract. The disrespect wasn't loud. No one mocked me. No one dismissed my career or my intelligence. Instead, they edited me out of the decision-making process entirely. If the locket had been sold, and I was becoming increasingly certain it had been, it wasn't just about money. It was about priority, about which daughter's crisis justified sacrificing the legacy, and which daughter could be trusted to endure the sacrifice without protest. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I went home and opened my laptop. If there was a pattern, I would find it. Because normalization only works when someone accepts the narrative. And for the first time, I wasn't sure I did. There's a quiet moment in every family dynamic when you realize the role you've been playing was never accidental. It was assigned, not formally, not maliciously, but consistently enough that it becomes architecture. For me, that realization came a week later, sitting across from my mother at a small cafe near her church. She had asked to meet just to talk. That phrasing alone told me something was off. My mother doesn't meet to talk. She calls to request help. She stirred her tea without drinking it. "You've always been so strong, Penny," she began. "I've learned that compliments delivered before uncomfortable truths are rarely pure." I tried to be practical, I said. "That's what I mean." She smiled faintly. "You've never needed much from me?" There it was again, the mythology. I didn't need much, as if needing less made me easier to overlook. She continued. "Your grandmother always said you'd build your own security, that you wouldn't depend on anyone." It sounded like praise. It felt like justification. "For what?" I asked quietly. She hesitated, just enough. "For choices. she said finally. For difficult decisions a mother has to make. The words landed with precision. In my line of work, when someone speaks in abstraction, it's because the specifics are fragile. What decision? I asked. She looked down at her hands. Sometimes we have to prioritize where help is most urgent. There was no apology in her tone, no defiance either, just calm inevitability. I felt something click into place, not anger, not even betrayal. Recognition. In her mind, I was the daughter who could withstand loss. Lily was the daughter who might collapse without intervention. And when resources were finite, you don't shore up the foundation, you reinforce the crumbling wall. I understood the logic. I simply no longer agreed with it. You could have told me, I said. Told you what? She replied too quickly. So we were still pretending. I let it go. Not because I believed her, but because I understood the role she expected me to play in that moment. The reasonable one, the one who would nod, absorb the subtext, and keep the family equilibrium intact. I paid the bill, walked her to her car, hugged her the way I always did. Externally, nothing had shifted. Internally, everything had. On the drive home, I replayed every childhood moment that reinforced this assignment. When Lily forgot to submit a school form, I filled it out. When she crashed her first car, I handled the insurance call. When she maxed out her first credit card, I built her a repayment spreadsheet. Each time I told myself I was helping. What I didn't see was that I was reinforcing a system where I became infrastructure. Invisible, load-bearing, replaceable. The locket, if it was indeed gone, wasn't just jewelry. It was a symbolic redistribution. Legacy moved from stability to volatility, from preservation to damage control. And no one consulted the person it had been promised to. That wasn't an oversight. That was the role. The realization didn't make me emotional. It made me precise. Because once you understand the part you've been assigned, you can decide whether to keep performing it. And for the first time in my life, I was considering stepping off stage. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just permanently. The shift didn't happen in an argument. It happened in my own living room, on a Tuesday evening, with rain tapping softly against the windows. I had taken the locket's absence as a likely fact by then. I didn't need confirmation to understand the pattern, but understanding and accepting are different processes. I poured myself a glass of water, sat at my dining table, and opened my laptop. Not to search, not to investigate, just to think. In estate planning, there's a principle we discuss often: intent versus impact. A parent may intend fairness, but the impact of unequal distribution leaves scars. A decision made under pressure may feel justified, but its ripple can last decades. For the first time, I applied that framework to my own family. If my mother had sold the locket to cover Lily's gambling losses, and I was now certain that was what this investment phase truly was, then the intent may have been protection. But the impact? It was erasure. I stood and walked to the bookshelf where I kept a few of my grandmother's letters. She used to write in looping cursive, even when her hands trembled. I unfolded one she had sent me during my first year of graduate school. "You carry things quietly," she had written. "Just make sure you choose what deserves carrying." At 22, I thought she meant academic ambition. At 36, I understood she meant emotional labor. I sat back down and did something I had never done before. I made 2 columns on a blank sheet of paper. Column 1, what I protect. Column 2, what protects me. Under the first, I listed family stability, mother's peace, Lily's financial fallout, holiday harmony, unspoken secrets. Under the second, I hesitated. There were very few entries. My career, my savings, my routines. The imbalance was stark. For years, I had functioned as a shock absorber. When Lily made impulsive decisions, the impact dispersed across my mother's finances and often across my time and energy. When my mother avoided hard boundaries, I filled in the structure she wouldn't enforce. But nowhere in that system was there a mechanism protecting me. And I realized something subtle but profound. They weren't asking me to sacrifice. They were assuming I would. The locket was just the clearest symbol. I didn't feel rage. Rage demands immediate reaction. What I felt was clarity. Clarity that love does not require complicity. Clarity that silence is not the same as agreement. Clarity that I had been confusing endurance with virtue. The shift was internal, almost invisible. If you had called me that night, I would have sounded exactly the same. Calm, measured, warm. But something foundational had moved. Instead of asking, how do I fix this? I began asking, what happens if I don't? What happens if Lily experiences the full consequences of her gambling without rescue? What happens if my mother feels the weight of choosing one daughter's crisis over another daughter's trust? What happens if I stop cushioning? Not retaliation, just the withdrawal of infrastructure. That evening, I closed my laptop and placed my leather planner beside it. For the first time, I didn't write a note about Lily. I didn't document an amount. I didn't strategize a safety net. I wrote a single sentence: silence can be a boundary. And in that sentence, something shifted permanently, because I wasn't preparing to confront them. I was preparing to step back. And stepping back, when you've always been the one holding everything up, is its own kind of power. Silence had always been my reflex. Now it has become deliberate. There's a difference. Reflexive silence comes from wanting to keep the peace. Strategic silence comes from deciding not to interfere. 2 weeks after that night in my living room, Lily called. "Hey," she said brightly. "Quick question. Hypothetically, if someone needed short-term liquidity but didn't want it reflected in formal credit history, what's the cleanest way to structure that?" Hypothetically, I leaned back in my chair. In the past, I would have asked clarifying questions. I would have translated the subtext. I would have built a framework to minimize fallout. This time I let the pause stretch just slightly longer than usual. "I'm not sure," I said calmly. "You might want to consult a financial advisor," she laughed. "You are one." "I work in estate planning," I replied evenly, "not risk management for active gambling." The word landed gently but precisely. There was a beat of silence on the other end. "It's not gambling," she said quickly. "I didn't say it was," I answered that. Silence again. For the first time, I didn't feel it. She shifted tone. "Mum said you've been distant. I've been busy," which was true, but not in the way she meant. In the days that followed, small things accumulated. My mother texted, asking if I could review a loan document. I responded 2 days later instead of 2 minutes. When she asked if I could attend a meeting with her financial planner, I declined. "I trust you'll handle it," I wrote. That phrase used to belong to them. Now it belonged to me. The interesting part wasn't their reaction. It was their confusion. They didn't accuse me of being cruel. They didn't fight. They seemed unsettled. Like someone stepping onto a staircase and realizing a familiar step is missing. At Sunday dinner, Lily dominated the conversation again, this time about a temporary setback that required restructuring. My mother nodded anxiously. I listened. I didn't offer solutions. When my mother glanced at me, perhaps expecting commentary, I simply smiled. "Everything okay?" she asked later when Lily stepped away. "Yes," I said. "I'm just observing." That word made her uncomfortable, because observing means recording, and they had always relied on my participation, not my detachment. What they mistook for weakness over the years was actually regulation. I never reacted impulsively. I never escalated. They confused that with inability. Now my calm wasn't cushioning them. It was separating me. The absence of my interference created space. Space where consequences could begin forming naturally. Bills are unpaid long enough to generate fees. Deadlines missed without quite a reminder. Emotional outbursts that no longer landed on a stabilizing response. I didn't expose anyone. I didn't confront. I simply stopped absorbing impact. And in that vacuum, reality started to surface. One evening, my mother called, sounding more strained than usual. "I don't know why Lily can't just manage herself," she sighed. I listened. In the past, I would have said, "Let's create a structured repayment plan," or maybe cap her access to funds. This time I asked only one question. "What boundary have you set?" There was a long pause. Silence, when you're used to being rescued, feels like abandonment. But I wasn't abandoning them. I was withdrawing from a role I never consciously agreed to play. And the more I stepped back, the more something became clear. If the locket had been sold to cover a gambling debt, it wasn't a one-time decision. It was a symptom. And symptoms don't resolve because one person keeps compensating. They resolve when the system changes or collapses. I was no longer preventing either outcome. Part 7. What they never noticed. When people assume you won't act, they stop watching you. That was their first mistake. Silence in my family had always meant surrender. When I stopped arguing, they believed I had accepted things. When I didn't question inconsistencies, they assumed I hadn't seen them. But I see patterns for a living. And once I stepped back emotionally, I could observe them clearly. Preparation didn't look dramatic. It looked like an organization. First, I requested copies of my grandmother's estate documents from the attorney who had handled the probate process. Not because I intended to challenge anything, but because I wanted clarity. Verbal promises don't hold weight legally, and I already knew the locket hadn't been formally itemized. Still, I reviewed every clause. Intent matters, even when it isn't enforceable. Next, I ran a quiet valuation search through a private jewelry broker I occasionally consult for clients. I described the locket in detail, its weight, era, and engraving. I didn't give names. I simply asked what a piece like that might reasonably fetch on short notice. The estimate came back within range of the bank deposit I had seen. 18 to 22,000. The number settled something in me. This wasn't a minor decluttering decision. It was an emergency liquidation. Then I did what no one expected. I documented the timeline. Lily's investment phase begins. Increased loan requests. Mother's rising withdrawals. Private asset sale. 18,500. Locket missing. Not to build a case, to build clarity. I also did something more subtle. I reviewed my own financial entanglements with them. There were small ones. Co-signed documents from years ago that I had forgotten about. An emergency credit line I had helped Lily secure. A shared access setting on one of my mother's accounts from when I was assisting her during Grandma's illness. One by one, I removed myself. I didn't announce it. I simply closed permissions, updated authorizations, declined renewals. When Lily texted asking if I could just glance at a new loan agreement, I responded, I'm stepping back from financial advising within the family. I don't think it's healthy. That word healthy shifted the frame. They had always framed my involvement as helpful. I reframed it as unsustainable. Meanwhile, I began researching something else entirely. Legacy preservation laws in Oregon regarding contested verbal bequests tied to demonstrable intent. Not to sue, not to accuse, but to understand leverage. There's a difference between revenge and leverage. Revenge is emotional, leverage is structural. I didn't want the locket back, not from a resale market, not through confrontation. What I wanted was acknowledgement, accountability, and protection moving forward. What they never noticed was that while they were reacting to Lily's volatility, I was restructuring my position. I increased my personal savings allocation, shifted a portion of my investments into assets entirely insulated from family overlap, updated my own will, explicitly documenting sentimental items and their intended recipients with photographic appendices. I would not allow ambiguity to repeat itself in my generation. At Sunday dinner, I remained the same outwardly. Calm, observant, polite. Lily spoke more erratically now. The highs were higher, the lows are sharper. My mother looked thinner. No one asked what I was doing in the background. They assumed stability required no maintenance. They didn't realize that stability, when withdrawn, creates gravity, and gravity pulls truth downward. One evening, as I reviewed the broker's valuation again, I felt something unexpected. Not anger, not sadness, finality. If my mother had sold the locket to cover Lily's gambling debt, she would have made a choice about which daughter's future she was protecting. Now I was making mine, and unlike theirs, my choice would be documented, quietly, permanently. Part 8. The private reveal. The confirmation didn't come through confrontation. It came through carelessness. About 3 months after I first noticed the bank deposit, Lily showed up at my apartment unannounced. That alone told me something was wrong. She prefers calling first. She likes controlling the atmosphere of an interaction. Her eyes were rimmed red, but she wasn't crying. She looked tired. The kind of tired that comes from chasing losses. I need advice, she said the moment I opened the door. I stepped aside and let her in. We sat at my dining table, the same place where I had drawn those 2 columns weeks earlier. I messed up, she admitted. No theatrics this time. No deflection. It got bigger than I thought. How big? I asked evenly. She hesitated, then named a number. It was almost identical to the deposit I had seen. My pulse didn't spike. It slowed. And how was it covered? I asked. She looked away. Mom handled it. Handled how? Another pause. This one is longer. She sold something. Silence. What did she sell? I asked softly. Lily's jaw tightened. Why does it matter? Because it matters. I didn't say that aloud. What did she sell? I repeated, same tone. She exhaled sharply. It was just a necklace, okay? Grandma's. Mum said you barely even wore it. There it was. Not an accusation. Not a confession delivered with shame, just justification. As if usage determined worth. For a moment, I watched her. Really watched her. There was no malice in her face, only self-preservation. The logic of someone who believes crisis outranks sentiment. She told you that? I asked. She said you'd understand, Lily replied quickly. You always do. That sentence did more damage than the sale itself. You always do. In that moment, I realized the leverage wasn't financial. It was narrative. They had built a story about me. The resilient one, the rational one, the one who would sacrifice quietly because she could afford to. And they had used that story to justify taking something promised to me without a conversation. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't stand up. I didn't accuse. Instead, I asked one final question. If the situation were reversed, I said calmly, and something meant for you had been sold to fix my mistake, would that feel acceptable? Lily opened her mouth to answer, then closed it. Silence filled the room. Not hostile, just undeniable. I didn't ask her to sell that specifically, she said finally. I just needed help. I nodded. Intent versus impact. She needed help. My mother chose the fastest liquidity. The locket was the cleanest asset to move. It was efficient, and it was final. I stood and walked to my bookshelf, pulling down the small box of my grandmother's letters. I placed one in front of Lily, not to prove anything, but to anchor myself. She told me once that it would stay with the woman who understood its weight, I said quietly. Lily looked at the paper but didn't touch it. I thought she meant responsibility, I continued. Now I think she meant consequence. That was the private reveal. Not explosive, not dramatic. Just clarity. The locket was gone. Sold. Converted into temporary relief for a problem that would likely resurface unless something fundamental changed. And the real discovery wasn't that my mother had sold it. It was that they both believed I would accept it without recalibrating the system that made it possible. They were wrong. I didn't ask for repayment. I didn't demand an apology. I thanked Lily for telling me. And as she left, something inside me settled completely. Because now I wasn't operating on suspicion. I was operating on fact. And facts don't require emotion. They require decisions. Part 9. The decision point. After Lily left my apartment that night, I didn't cry. I cleaned the kitchen. There's something grounding about restoring order to physical space when emotional space has shifted. I wiped down the table slowly, methodically, as if clearing away crumbs of illusion. The facts were simple now. The locket had been sold. The money had covered Lily's gambling losses. My mother believed I would understand. Lily believed I would absorb it. No one had intended cruelty, but no one had considered consent. That distinction mattered to me more than the jewelry. I sat down with my planner and wrote 3 possible paths forward. Option 1. Confrontation. A direct conversation with my mother. Demand acknowledgement. Express hurt. Risk emotional escalation. Possibly fracture the relationship. Option 2. Legal challenge. Explore whether verbal intent could be argued. Seek restitution. Create formal pressure. Win the principal. Lose the family. Option 3. Structural withdrawal. No public conflict. No legal battle. Instead, permanently remove myself from being the family's stabilizing mechanism. Allow natural consequences to unfold. Protect my own future. Redefine access. Each option carried a cost. The first would satisfy emotion, but destabilize everything. My mother would feel attacked. Lily would spiral defensively. I would become dramatic, a role I had never played. The second would transform the situation into litigation. Even if technically viable, it would feel like punishing grief. I didn't want the money back. I wanted the pattern to stop. The third was quieter, harder to detect, harder to argue against. And irreversible, because once you stop rescuing, people either learn to stand or they fall without a net. I sat with the discomfort of that truth. Was I willing to let my mother feel the financial strain she had shielded Lily from? Was I willing to let Lily confront the full cost of her gambling without my guidance? Was I willing to be perceived as cold? Yes, not out of revenge, out of balance. The locket represented legacy. Stability passed from one generation to the next. It had been converted into short-term relief. I couldn't reverse that decision, but I could ensure my own legacy would not be redirected without my consent. That meant boundaries that were not negotiable, First, I would remove myself from any future financial involvement with Lily completely. No advice, no co-signing, no informal structuring. Second, I would formalize my own estate planning in a way that prevented ambiguity. Every sentimental object is documented, every intention is written. Third, and this was the quietest but most significant, I would restructure my relationship with my mother financially. Until now, I had operated as a silent safety net. If her retirement dipped too low, I would supplement. If medical costs surged, I would absorb part of it. That assumption had never been spoken, but it existed. I decided it would no longer exist. I would not punish her. I would not withdraw love, but I would withdraw automatic protection. The decision felt heavy, not dramatic heavy, because I knew what would follow. Without my stabilizing presence, Lily's volatility would surface more sharply. My mother's resources would strain faster. Questions would arise. Pressure would build. And when it did, I would not step in. That was the irreversible part. I closed my planner and turned off the light. For years, they had relied on my predictability. Tomorrow, I will still be calm, still be polite, still be composed. But I would no longer be predictable in the way that enabled them. And sometimes the most powerful move isn't confrontation. It's removal. The shift didn't announce itself. It unfolded in paperwork. The morning after I made my decision, I began with something simple. Access. For years, I had been listed as an authorized viewer on two of my mother's financial accounts. It had started during my grandmother's illness, just in case something urgent happened. The access had never been revoked. I logged in once more, not to examine balances, but to confirm permissions. Then I removed myself. No explanation, no message, just administrative detachment. Next, I reviewed an old co-signed line of credit Lily had opened during what she once called her entrepreneurial phase. It had a low remaining balance, but my name was still attached. I paid off my portion, precisely the amount required to sever liability, then submitted formal documentation to withdraw as guarantor at renewal. Again, no announcement. Silence, when it's strategic, doesn't require spectacle. Over the next few weeks, I made incremental adjustments. I declined invitations to review Lily's contracts. I responded to financial questions with, "I trust you'll consult a professional." I refrained from offering unsolicited advice when I noticed inconsistencies in conversation. At Sunday dinner, the air shifted subtly. Without my interjections, practical details slipped. Bills went unmentioned, deadlines passed without a reminder. Lily grew more agitated, though she didn't connect it to me. My mother, however, began watching me differently. One evening, she asked, "You've been quieter than usual. Is something wrong?" I considered the question carefully. "No," I said. "I've just realized I don't need to manage everything." The sentence was neutral, but it landed. There's an uncomfortable space that forms when someone stops performing their assigned role. It's not immediate chaos, it's unease. Meanwhile, I took steps that no one saw. I met with my own attorney and finalized revisions to my estate plan. Every sentimental item is catalogued with photographs, clear written explanations of intent, no room for reinterpretation under pressure. I also created a separate trust vehicle for my long-term investments, airtight, insulated from informal family obligations. Not as punishment, as clarity. Then I did something that felt almost symbolic. I opened a small safe deposit box at a local bank and placed my grandmother's letters inside. The locket was gone, but the narrative attached to it would not be rewritten. Protection, I realized, doesn't have to be loud. By the second month of my silence, consequences began surfacing in small ways. Lily's temporary setbacks sounded less temporary. My mother mentioned liquidating another minor asset to smooth things over. I didn't intervene, not even to caution, because intervention would have signaled that I was still absorbing the impact. Instead, I listened, calm, present, unreactive. There is power in being the only stable person in a room and choosing not to stabilize it. They didn't notice the legal insulation. They didn't see the financial restructuring. They didn't understand that the safety net had been quietly folded and put away. They only felt a growing absence. An absence, when someone has relied on you for years, is disorienting. But I wasn't disappearing. I was repositioning. The difference would become clear soon enough. Consequences rarely arrive dramatically. They accumulate. It started with small cracks. One Sunday afternoon, my mother mentioned casually that her credit card interest rate had increased. "It's just temporary," she said almost to herself. "I'll move things around." In the past, I would have immediately suggested restructuring options, balance transfers, consolidation strategies, asset allocation adjustments. This time I nodded. I'm sure you'll figure it out. She looked at me as if waiting for more. There wasn't any. A week later, Lily called sounding brittle. They froze my account, she said. Just for review, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Why? I asked calmly. Too many transactions, differences. Actions of Lord. That tends to happen with high volatility, I replied. Silence. She waited. Perhaps for me to offer a workaround, a contact, a strategic solution. I didn't. Instead, I asked, what's your plan? Her frustration sharpened. Why are you being like this? Like what? Detached. That word again. Detached is what people call you when you stop fixing their chaos. I'm trusting you to handle your decisions, I said evenly. You're capable. The compliment disarmed her, because it wasn't sarcasm. I meant it. The next shift was subtler but heavier. My mother stopped asking me to attend meetings with her financial planner. She still mentioned them, but vaguely, as if withholding specifics out of pride. Then one evening, she called later than usual. I may need to adjust my retirement timeline, she said carefully. How so? Just recalibrating. Recalibrating is a word I use professionally. Hearing it from her felt like a mirror. What changed? I asked. There was a pause. I made choices, she said quietly. Not a confession, not an apology, just acknowledgement. For the first time, I sensed that she understood the cost, not just financially, but relationally. My silence had forced space around the decision. Without my cushioning presence, the weight of it had nowhere to disperse. At dinner that weekend, Lily was uncharacteristically subdued. She didn't dominate conversation. She scrolled her phone more than she spoke. My mother seemed older somehow. Halfway through the meal, Lily muttered, "It's not fair that everything compounds so fast." I looked up. "Compounding works both ways," I said gently. She frowned. "What does that mean?" "Risk compounds, so does stability." No one responded, but the sentence lingered in the air like a quiet equation. Over the next month, tangible effects became harder to ignore. My mother sold another minor piece of jewelry, nothing sentimental, but still symbolic. Lily downsized her apartment. She stopped talking about investment strategies and started mentioning recovery plans. And still I did not intervene, not out of cruelty, but because stepping in now would reset the cycle. For years, my reliability had buffered them from experiencing full consequence. Now, the absence of that buffer was forcing clarity. They began to see what I had seen months earlier, that the system was unsustainable. One evening, my mother asked softly, "Do you think I made a mistake?" It was the closest she had come to addressing the locket directly. I considered her carefully. "I think decisions made in urgency feel different when urgency passes," I said. She swallowed. "And you?" she asked. "How do you feel?" I held her gaze. "I feel informed." Not angry, not resentful, informed. Because once you understand the structure of a dynamic, you stop taking it personally. You start treating it as architecture. And architecture, when flawed, eventually reveals its stress points. The consequences had begun. Not explosive, just undeniable. Part 12, too late to fix it. By the 4th month, the strain stopped being subtle. It showed up in posture, in tone, in the way conversations shortened instead of stretched. My mother began cancelling small luxuries she had once considered non-negotiable, her weekly floral deliveries, her short weekend trips to the coast. She framed each change as simplifying, but I could see the arithmetic behind it. Lily's apartment downgrade became more permanent than she had expected. Her tone shifted from confident recalibration to quiet defensiveness. And then one evening, it cracked. I was at my mother's house when Lily arrived unexpectedly, voice already tight. "They're threatening legal action," she said, dropping her bag on the table. "It's harassment." "For what?" my mother asked. Alarm rising instantly. "For the balance, they say I violated terms." I stayed silent. My mother turned to me reflexively, the old instinct, the unspoken plea for stabilization. This was the moment that would have reset everything months ago. I would have stepped in, asked for documentation, negotiated payment structures, softened language, absorbed emotional escalation. Instead, I folded my hands calmly. "What does your contract say?" I asked Lily. She blinked. "I don't know. Oh, it's complicated." "Then read it," I said gently. She stared at me as if I had spoken a foreign language. My mother's voice trembled. Penelope, can you just look at it? Just to make sure they aren't taking advantage. I won't be involved in this, I said quietly. The room went still, not because I raised my voice. Didn't. But because it was the first explicit boundary I had verbalized. Lily's face flushed. So that's it, you're just going to watch? I'm not watching, I replied. I'm stepping out. You've never stepped out, she shot back. Exactly. My mother looked between us, confusion and regret colliding in her expression. This isn't about you, she said quickly, as if trying to prevent fracture. But it was about me. It had always included me, even when they pretended it didn't. I know, I answered calmly. That's the point. There was no shouting, no dramatic accusations about the locket, no emotional explosion about betrayal. Just a quiet, irreversible shift. Lily paced the kitchen. You're punishing us. No, I said. I'm declining responsibility for choices that weren't mine. That sentence settled heavily. My mother sank into a chair. For the first time, I saw something like panic. Not about money, but about control. She had always believed she could redistribute stability from one daughter to compensate for the other. Now the redistribution system had ended. Can we fix this? She asked softly. The question wasn't about the legal threat. It wasn't even about Lily. It was about us. And that was when I understood something difficult. Financial damage can be repaired with time. Trust, once bypassed instead of broken openly, erodes quietly. You can stabilize your finances, I said gently. You can set boundaries. You can restructure. And with you, she pressed. I held her gaze. That depends on whether we acknowledge what was done. Silence. Not hostile, just heavy with recognition. The tragedy wasn't that the locket was gone. It was that they had assumed my resilience meant I wouldn't recalibrate my place in the family. Now they were discovering that stability, once withdrawn, cannot simply be reinstalled. And some decisions, especially the ones made in urgency, cannot be undone. Not because of anger, but because timing matters. And the time to consult me had passed. The conversation happened 3 nights later. Not at the kitchen table, not during a crisis. My mother asked me to come over, just to talk. This time, her voice didn't carry defensiveness. It carried fatigue. Lily wasn't there. We sat in the living room, the lamp casting a soft circle of light between us. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, she said it. I sold your grandmother's locket. No justification attached, no softening language. Just fact. I nodded once. I know. Her eyes flickered. Lily told you? Yes. She folded her hands tightly in her lap. I didn't plan it. I panicked. The amount was due. I didn't want her facing legal trouble. I understand urgency, I said. I told myself you'd be okay, she continued. You've always been okay. There it was again, the myth. I've been capable, I corrected gently. That's different. She absorbed that. I thought because you're stable, because you don't struggle the way she does, it wouldn't hurt you the same way. I considered her carefully before answering. It didn't hurt me because of the object, I said. It hurt because I wasn't consulted. Her shoulders sagged slightly. I didn't think I needed to consult. Yes, I replied softly. That's what changed things. The room felt calm. No raised voices, no tears, just clarity being placed on the table between us. I chose the daughter who felt fragile, she whispered, and assumed the other one would absorb it, I finished. She nodded. For a long moment, we simply sat with that truth. I can't get it back, she said. I know. I can repay you. It's not about repayment. That seemed to confuse her more than anything. Then I explained slowly without accusation. It's about the pattern. For years, when Lily's decisions created instability, I stepped in. Quietly, structurally. That made it easier for you to keep choosing urgency over accountability. Her breath caught slightly. I didn't see it that way. I know. Silence again. Not tense, just processing. I was afraid she would collapse, she said. And you were never afraid I would, I replied. She looked at me then, not as the stable one, not as infrastructure, but as a daughter. That wasn't fair, she said. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a grand apology, but it was acknowledgement. I'm not angry, I told her, but I won't resume the old role. She nodded slowly. You've already stepped out? Yes. What does that mean for us? She asked. It means I'm your daughter, I said evenly. Not your contingency plan. The simplicity of it seemed to settle something in her. There was no explosion, no emotional crescendo, no demand for restitution, just a quiet restructuring of relationship. When I left that night, she hugged me longer than usual. Not in panic, in recognition. The locket was still gone, but the illusion that I would silently carry every cost had disappeared with it. And that, in its own way, was a restoration. Part 14. Who I am now. It has been a year since the locket was sold. If you walked into my life today, you wouldn't see drama. You wouldn't see fracture. You wouldn't even necessarily see distance. What you would see is recalibration. My mother adjusted her finances. Not quickly, not easily, but deliberately. She set limits with Lily that she had never enforced before. The first time she declined one of Lily's requests for emergency money, she called me afterward. Not for strategy, but to say, I did it. There was pride in her voice, and fear. I didn't manage the aftermath. I didn't draft repayment schedules. I simply listened. Lily, without a safety net, began to experience consequence in a way she hadn't before. She entered a financial counseling program on her own. She downsized again. She stopped referring to gambling as investment. We don't talk about the locket often. We don't need to. Its absence did its work. As for me, I changed in ways that are less visible. I no longer confuse usefulness with love. That was the deepest shift. For most of my life, I believed my value in the family came from being reliable, anticipating needs, solving problems before they surfaced, absorbing volatility so others didn't have to feel it fully. But reliability without boundaries becomes self-erasure. Now, when I sit at Sunday dinners, I don't scan the room for instability. I don't calculate risk in the background. I don't mentally prepare contingency plans for conversations that haven't happened yet. I participate as a daughter, not infrastructure. If Lily mentions a financial decision, I ask one question at most. Then I let the silence stand. If my mother hints at stress, I offer emotional support, not structural rescue. The difference is subtle but absolute. Professionally, I've grown more precise too. When clients speak about fairness, I probe deeper. I ask about unspoken roles, about assumptions hidden under praise. Who is expected to endure? I ask them gently, because I know now that endurance, when unexamined, becomes a silent tax. I keep my grandmother's letters in a safe deposit box. Sometimes I take one out and read it. I don't mourn the locket anymore. I understand it. It represented weight, and I no longer carry weight that wasn't chosen. My relationship with my mother is quieter, but clearer. She consults me now, not because she assumes I'll fix things, but because she respects that I might decline. That distinction matters. Lily and I are still sisters, not enemies, not estranged, but different. There's a new awareness between us, a recognition that I will not cushion her risk. And surprisingly, that awareness has made her more careful. I didn't win anything. I didn't reclaim jewelry. I didn't stage a dramatic reckoning. What I did was redefine my role. And in doing so, I shifted the architecture of my family without raising my voice. That's who I am now. Not the stable one, not the silent absorber, just Penelope. And that feels like enough. When people hear this story, they often expect a sharper ending, a lawsuit, a dramatic apology, a moment where the locket is somehow repurchased and returned to my hands. That didn't happen. The heirloom is gone, melted down or resold, most likely, converted into temporary relief for a crisis that forced deeper change later anyway. And strangely, I don't feel lost when I think about it now, because the real inheritance was never the gold. It was the lesson. Families don't just pass down objects. They pass down roles, narratives, expectations about who will carry what weight. Sometimes those roles feel like compliments. You're so strong. You're the reliable one. You'll be fine. But strength without consent becomes obligation. Reliability without boundaries becomes exploitation, and you'll be fine can quietly mean you'll endure this for us. The moment I discovered my mother had secretly sold my grandmother's last keepsake to pay off my youngest sister's gambling debt, I could have reacted with anger. Instead, I chose clarity. I chose to stop reinforcing a system that relied on my silence. And that choice, calm, quiet, irreversible, changed everything more than confrontation ever could have. If you're the steady one in your family, the dependable one, the one who doesn't need much, I want to tell you something gently. You are allowed to need transparency. You are allowed to require consultation. You are allowed to step back without announcing war. Boundaries don't have to be loud to be permanent. Sometimes quiet dominance isn't about overpowering anyone. It's about removing yourself from roles you never consciously agreed to play. So I'm curious, have you ever realized that being the strong one came with a cost no one acknowledged? And if you did, what did you choose to do about it?